Christmas is supposed to be a season of warmth, a time of lights glowing in dark windows. Families reunited after a long year, gifts wrapped with ribbons and quiet hopes for peace. But every now and then, the lights hide something else. Behind the familiar decorations, behind the smiles and family photos, behind the sound of laughter and carols. Some people harbor storms that finally break on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. And when they do, the holidays become the perfect stage for terror. Tonight we dive into 3 true stories of Christmas turning into something far darker. Not legends, not ghost tales, but documented crimes that shattered entire communities and left investigators struggling to understand how joy could turn into slaughter so quickly. Turn off the lights, settle in, and remember, not every monster waits for midnight. Some walk right through your front door, carrying gifts. The Covina Christmas Massacre, 2008. Christmas Eve, 2008. Covina, California, a quiet suburban neighborhood where the streets were lined with glowing nativity scenes and inflatable Santas swaying in the cold breeze. Around 12:30 p.m., a knock sounded at the door of a home where a large family had gathered for their annual Christmas party. Children ran to check who it was, and when they opened the door, the sight made them laugh. Santa Claus himself stood outside, holding what looked like a large gift box. But the man inside this costume wasn't there to spread joy. It was Bruce Pardo, 45 years old, divorced, recently unemployed, and seething with resentment toward his ex-wife and her family, the very people celebrating inside. Witnesses would later recall that he stepped only a few feet into the house, smiled for a moment, and then pulled out a handgun. The room dissolved into chaos. He fired rapidly, targeting anyone within reach. People dove behind furniture, children screamed. Some guests ran toward the backyard, others froze, too shocked to move. Within minutes, 9 people were dead, including several family members who had welcomed him for years before the divorce tore everything apart. But Pardo wasn't finished. The gift he carried wasn't a present at all. Inside was a homemade device filled with gasoline and accelerants. He opened it, releasing a wave of fire that turned the home into an inferno. The heat became so intense that firefighters later said the metal inside the house melted. As investigators combed through the ruins, they found something even darker. Pardo had trapped the home of his ex-wife's divorce attorney, planning to kill people before ultimately leaving the state. He never made it to the next location. Hours later, he died by suicide. Detectives described the case as one of the most vicious and methodically planned domestic massacres they had ever seen. It wasn't a moment of rage, it was a blueprint of revenge, disguised in red velvet. Christmas morning dawned over Covina with smoke still rising into the sky. A neighborhood that had gone to sleep accepting presents and laughter woke up to sirens and ash. And every year since, locals say Christmas Eve never feels the same.
Pardo was severely injured during that explosion. He suffered third-degree burns on both arms. It also appears that the Santa Claus suit that he was wearing did melt onto his body.
Act 2. The Downtown Post and the Dayton Christmas Massacres. If the Covina Massacre was driven by revenge, the next case is something else entirely. Violence with no motive beyond thrill, chaos, and opportunity. Dayton, Ohio, December 1992. A group of 4 young people calling themselves the Downtown Post began what locals would later call the Christmas killings. It started on December 24th and continued for nearly 3 days. They were teenagers and barely adults, drifting together on the streets, feeding off each other's impulsiveness. What followed was a chain of robberies, executions, and cold-blooded attacks that felt almost random. As if the group was hunting for victims simply because they wanted to see what they could get away with. Their first victim was a man they knew, shot point blank. From there, they moved on to strangers, breaking into homes, attacking people out walking, and even targeting supposed friends. No one was safe from their frenzy. By the time the spree ended, 6 people were dead and at least 2 more were severely wounded. The most chilling detail? Many of victims were killed not because they resisted, but because members of the pose feared they might talk. To them, it became a cleanup step. When police finally caught up to them, detectives described the group as disturbingly casual, even amused, recounting them like stories from a wild night out. Their reign of terror ended with long prison sentences for all members. The group's leader ultimately received the death penalty, but the psychological scar left on Dayton lasted for longer. Residents say Christmas felt different for years, more cautious, more aware that even the happiest season can be punctured by senseless brutality. In this case, even didn't wear a Santa costume. It wore everyday clothes and walked the streets with a grin. Act 3. The Murder Under the Christmas Tree, Michelle O'Dowd, 2011. Our final story is quieter, more intimate, and in many ways more disturbing because it didn't happen at a party or on a street, but inside a home decorated for the holiday, Florida, 2011. Michelle was 67, kind, trusting, and known for helping people who were down on their luck. That December, she let a woman she considered a friend, Patty White, stay at her home for Christmas. It was a gesture of generosity, a simple act of compassion, but White's gratitude turned into something far darker. Investigators determined that she attacked Michelle in her own home. Her and struck her before dragging the body to the living room. And then came the details that shook even seasoned officers. Michelle's body was placed beneath the Christmas tree, partially covered with wrapped gifts. The image horrified everyone involved in the case. It wasn't just a murder, it was a staging, a twisted attempt to use the holiday itself as camouflage. A scene that should have represented warmth and family instead concealed death. The next day, Michelle didn't show up for work. Her brother went to check on her, walking into what appeared at first glance to be a home prepared for Christmas morning. But something was wrong. Decorations looked disturbed, drawers were open, and the tree seemed oddly arranged. When he looked closer, he saw a foot beneath a pile of presents. White attempted to stage an apparent burglary, but her cover fell apart almost immediately. She was arrested and later sentenced to 45 years in prison. For Michelle's family, Christmas never returned to normal. It became a reminder of betrayal and of how even acts of kindness can be manipulated by someone desperate and violent. Christmas amplifies whatever's already inside people. For most, it brings out generosity, nostalgia, and warmth. But for a few, it amplifies resentment, desperation, or madness. These 3 cases don't share the same motive. One was driven by revenge, another by thrill and cruelty, the third by desperation twisted into murder. But they all share one chilling truth. Holidays don't stop darkness, they don't pause human nature, they don't protect anyone from the cruelty people are capable of. And maybe that's why these cases stay in our minds, because Christmas is supposed to be safe, a bubble against the rest of the world. But these stories force us to admit that evil doesn't wait for December to pass. Sometimes it chooses Christmas on purpose. Lights, decorations, gifts, they can create the perfect illusion of safety, but illusions are fragile. So when you see the glow of Christmas lights this year, remember the shadows they cast, and stay safe.